history is made up of facts, why do different people remember the same event so differently? We often grow up thinking history is a collection of truths, things that definitely happened and we all collectively agree on them. But when we start to research specific events, we often find that this is not always the case. The same story can be told and remembered from multiple different perspectives depending on who is telling the story. History is often seen as objective, but how far can we consider this to be right if it is often influenced by power, perspective, and by context? Often, the louder voice, the dominant culture, or the government gets to decide on what is remembered and how it is remembered. Now, all of this begs to ask the question of, what are facts? Well, the official definition defines it as something that is known to have happened or to exist, especially something for which proof exists or which about there is information. So in history, where do we look for our information? Our information are contemporary sources, first-hand account of events such as diary entries, government records. They can be poems, songs, paintings. The list is endless. But, however, not all of these are neutral. We can divide historical facts into two. Firstly, more concrete data. These are dates, names, places. For example, on the 15th of April, 1912, the Titanic sunk. This cannot be contested. The second category is interpretations, such as how events unfolded, why such things happened, and who was at fault. Let's take a look at an example. On the 14th of July, 1789, a prison in France, in Bastille, was stormed. It is factually known that the prison was taken and captured by a Parisian crowd. We cannot disagree with this. But, however, interpretations of this event vary. For example, was this the moment the French Revolution truly began? Or was this just a carefully coordinated political move? Was this a descent into violent chaos? Or was this just a heroic act of liberty? We are not arguing or disagreeing with the first half, but the second part, we need to critically think and consider the implications, because it is those facts that shape how we view the past. So as we delve into this question of what are facts and what are interpretations, let's view how interpretations have had an impact on this. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche famously once said, "There are no facts, only interpretations." Now, this does not mean that everything we know doesn't exist, but it challenges the concept that facts as we know them exist without context or some form of bias. When someone selects specific details or emphasizes aspects over other aspects or frame an event in a particular way, they are creating an interpretation. On the other hand, if we look to Michael Foucault, his argument is essentially that knowledge is linked to power, i.e. those who hold control shape what becomes the accepted truth. Now, if we bring this to history, this can mean that official versions of events often reflect values, goals, and perspectives of those who hold control, not from those who are actually there. So why does this matter? Well, if we just treat history as this timeline of facts, we create the risk of accepting a simplified, narrow, and in certain circumstances, misleading account of the past. What we need to acknowledge is that history can be constructed. It is not always about what happened, but it's about how it's been recorded and remembered. So I appreciate for many of you, history lessons must almost feel like history themselves. So let's look at some well-known historical events and see how interpretations have had an impact. So firstly, let's take a look at World War II. While it's mostly viewed with great pride and this great fight against tyranny, it actually is remembered very differently across the globe. If we hop from country to country, each one recounts it in a slightly different way. Firstly, let's take a look at Russia. So in Russia, it's the Great Patriotic War, a story of national survival and heroism. The USSR suffered the most casualties and pushed the Nazis back from the east. To them, they believed that they were key to bringing victory to the Allies. In Japan and Germany, there is so much public discussion over how to acknowledge the atrocities, shifting to a view of national responsibility. In France and Italy, their focus is heavily on their resistance movements. Across the pond in the US, their narratives often highlight the great US military might or the use of the atomic bomb to end the war. And in contrast with Russia, they believed they were key to bringing victory. And finally here in the UK, narratives often highlight victory and liberation, or Churchill's famous speeches, but leave out unheroic aspects, such as the destruction of the city of Dresden in February 1945, where RAF and USAAF troops bombed and killed nearly 25,000 civilians, or the use of colonial troops in British warfare. Every country tells a different story in a way that would best shape their national identity, while perhaps choosing to ignore unfavorable moments. Now, a more recent example would be the Cold War. Both the US and the USSR both used propaganda to control the historical narratives to serve their view. In the West, particularly by the US, the USSR was portrayed as oppressive, and there was heavy emphasis on the dangers of communism. While in the Soviet Union, the US was portrayed as this imperialistic, morally corrupt state. The same events, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis from 16th to 29th of October 1962 and the Vietnam War from 1955 to 1975, were portrayed through opposing perspectives, each one claiming to be the real truth. This was not a discussion on what facts were true. It was a discussion on what story would be the correct story. So some of you might be sitting here, do I ever trust any historical work ever again? But this is not the point. The point is to remind us that no single story is the whole story. Whenever we read any historical work, we need to ask ourselves 3 simple questions. Who wrote this? Why was this written? And what voices may be missing? Looking at multiple perspectives doesn't confuse our understanding, it deepens it. So I appreciate for many of you, you won't be doing this very often, but we can take this principle and bring it to the modern day when viewing the news or scrolling through social media. We are currently writing history. The things we believe and share now will shape how this period is viewed in the future. And we can see this right now. Across many countries, far-right and anti-establishment movements are gaining ground in what is known as the rightification of Europe and the West. Their narratives thrive on distrust in mainstream institutions. Not only are they reshaping current political events, they are also reframing historical narratives to best suit their views. So if we want to understand the past or the present, it is important not to just read what suits our opinions, but actively seek out those that disagree. Question the dominative narrative and stay aware of who is telling the story and why. So if we return to my opening question that I posed you all with, if history is made up of facts, why do different people remember the same event so differently? It is because history is about what we choose to remember, what we are taught to believe, and what the loudest voice is. And we all need to make a concerted effort to challenge this. So the next time you hear someone say, well, that's just a fact, challenge them. Is it? Thank you.